So arousal is a level of physiological and psychological activation. So how activated we are. So this can go from being deep asleep, low levels of arousal, Garfield, to being highly excited, like the croc on the right. So again, this could be physiological arousal, which would be somatic, or psychological arousal, which would be cognitive. So those two symptoms very much similar to what we talked about within anxiety. So physiological symptoms like high heart rate and sweating, etc., and psychological cognitive arousal symptoms about being how awake you are and alert, etc. So the main thing we need to know about arousal is the different theories. The first theory is drive theory. It's an old theory that suggests, as you can see by the graph, that as arousal increases, so does performance. So we can see that it has this linear relationship here. So initially the theory suggested that with high arousal we get best performance. This theory is obviously widely criticised. I think it would be fairly easy to do that it doesn't cater for the concept of over-arousal. And also, so they then adapted the theory. So they then suggested that this thing about the dominant response. So the dominant response is a key part of your answer for a drive theory question. They said that the dominant response or habit is the thing that kicks in with high levels of arousal. So up here on the graph, dominant response takes over. And the dominant response is really linked to your ability level or your skill level. So with an expert performer, the dominant response will be good. So therefore, experts will perform well with situations of high arousal. So this is because their dominant response is a well-learned one. They're more likely to perform well. Novices have an incorrect dominant response. Failure is more likely with novices. So therefore, with high levels of arousal, a novice is likely to perform badly. The next theory, inverted U theory, does cater for the fact of over-arousal. So again, it does suggest initially that as arousal increases, so does performance. But this is up to an optimal point. So we can see that this goes up here, so that there is an actual optimal point of arousal. So right bang in the middle is where we get our best performance. However, over-arousal sees this decline in performance, so performance starts to go down if we get over-aroused. This is sometimes linked to cue utilization theory. So cue utilization is about what cues we take in. And here, with low levels of arousal, it's thought that our focus is too broad. In other words, we're taking in too many cues. Here, with optimal arousal, where our focus is very good, so we are selectively attending to the right cues very well. And with over-arousal, we're focusing on too few cues, so our focus is too narrow. The individual zone of optimal functioning is another branch of the inverted U theory, but it suggests that there isn't a point of optimal arousal, but there is a zone instead, and that we all have our individual zone. So everyone is different. So different people will require different levels of arousal. So I think this is getting now more to a realistic explanation of what goes on. So some people need to be really pumped up and some people need to be more calm. And each individual needs to find. So you can see here that this person, athlete A, requires a high zone. So high levels of arousal, someone who needs to be really pumped. Whereas athlete C over here requires a zone that has low levels of arousal. They require being quite calm and relaxed. There are different factors that can affect your zone. So the first one is your personality. So this is whether you are extrovert or introvert. So extroverts seek stimulation all the time. They require activation. They require situations of high arousal. They prefer that kind of thing because their reticular activation system isn't stimulated enough. So they seek out thrill type situations, situations of high arousal, and therefore will perform best with high arousal. Introverts have enough excitement in their lives. They will become anxious with too much arousal. So they'll perform best when arousal is low. The task or the sport or the skill. So simple gross tasks, all right, can be performed with high levels of arousal. So think of a shot putter or a weightlifter who really has to get themselves psyched up for a big, massive, maximum effort to lift as much as they possibly can. However, if a more complex, more perceptual, more accurate task needs to be performed, much more considered and with decisions to be made, etc., lower levels of arousal are more appropriate. Lastly, your stage of learning or levels of experience. So this isn't saying that experts always prefer high arousal, it's just that they can cope with it. So experts can perform well in situations of high arousal, whereas novices perform better with low arousal because they've got other things to think about. So I think that experts are able to focus on dealing with their emotional state, their arousal levels, because they're able to perform the task automatically, whereas novices have to think about what they're doing in terms of the skill. The next concept is that of flow. Now, so flow is a theory in itself. It's quite modern in terms of research, but it also links to the others. So its flow is about just that best performance, that best state you could possibly be in for a performance. It's thought that it doesn't happen very often, and athletes might get into flow a couple of times only, or even once in their career. So you can see by the definition that it's been totally absorbed, so it brings in the concentration that we've talked about already. Mind and body working harmoniously. Effortless is another good word to describe flow. And it just feels good. It's that feeling where everything seems to click and it feels almost easy. So things that affect flow, obviously your arousal levels. So you need to be in your zone, basically. A balanced perception of demand, so we're not anxious here. All right, we know what's required, we've taken it all into consideration, and we're quite happy with that. Often, situations of high incentive value contribute to flow. So often it will be an Olympic final type situation. You will be focusing really well, and you will be very confident. And everything's gone well, so you're prepared, you know exactly what you need to do, you feel physically good, etc. And the situation, in terms of the atmosphere, again, can be helpful. So, Csikszentmihalyi's diagram suggests that flow occurs over here on the top left, where you are excited and happy, where there are high levels of somatic arousal, but low levels of cognitive anxiety. The last theory is catastrophe theory. And this is the first theory because the other theories really just look at arousal levels. This theory actually looks at the relationship between arousal and anxiety put together. So there are two situations that catastrophe theory looks at, and they are the two in the blue boxes here. So first of all, with low cognitive anxiety. So if we just take these two situations, and the graph on the right looks at high cognitive anxiety. So we're basically saying that here on the left, that this situation is happening in just a standard, normal, run-of-the-mill game, even a friendly or a training situation. Whereas the high cognitive anxiety one over here is something important. So this is the big Olympic final, it's the World Championship, it's the massive game, it's the FA Cup final. So catastrophe theory says that these two situations produce different relationships between arousal and performance. So if we just get this one out of the way, with low cognitive anxiety, it's fairly straightforward. It's fairly much that inverted U kind of relationship. But note how we don't get that higher performance in that situation. The high cognitive anxiety situation has two parts to it, really. So it's saying that within that important game or competition, so you can see how if we control our arousal, then we can get a really good performance. So up here, all right, if we can actually keep arousal levels down and stay emotionally stable, then a great performance can occur, one of the best that we can ever get. And so we do see this in important situations. Think of Olympic finals where performers do perform really well. However, the difference, as you can see on the right hand side here, is that if we don't control our arousal level, then a catastrophe occurs. So we don't just go down, like inverted U theory said, like this kind of a relationship, that it actually steeply goes down and we have an absolute nightmare. The last part of the model suggests that if we do have time, that we are able to get back to low levels of arousal, then we can actually increase our performance again. So just in summary of that, we can see that again we do have this increase of arousal equals better performance up to an optimal point, really, again. But then if we continue to increase in our arousal levels, this is the dramatic decline. Good words to describe what happens in terms of a catastrophe. And then if we do have time, so this could be the third part could be it could be half time, or it could be time in between an event or a timeout or things like that. If you can calm down basically in that period and lower your arousal levels, you can actually get back up to a good performance within a sport. But that might depend on your sport and whether you have a chance to do that.